Hello. Making a modular synth, polyphonic, is generally quite hard. In this video, we're going to explore some ways to achieve polyphony and modular, with emphasis on making a basic patch and then twisting it to be more interesting and more like only a polyphonic modular can be. This is Suggested Systems 8, a complete polyphonic modular in 62 HP. Nice. If you've ever tried to do this yourself, you'll probably be familiar with at least one of the following issues. 1. It requires a ton of modules to even do basic things. For true polyphony, you need complete, separate modules from oscillator to output for each of the voices you want to have. To make a 4-voice single VCO subtractive patch using one-channel modules, you need 16 modules. 2. Then, unless you have multiple sequencers, to play a chord, you also need to somehow find a way to convert 4 key presses, for example, into 4 separate CV and gate signals. 3, you may find after you've gone to all this trouble that you have mismatching voltage ranges from franken-synthing different manufacturers together. For example, your envelope only outputs 5 volts, but your VCA needs 10 volts to fully open. We do sometimes get unlucky when we blend manufacturers because there are no standards. So it is worth doing a little homework on inputs and output voltages before trying. And 4th and finally, above all, it's just a complete faff. To patch a simple 4-voice patch is the work of 16 cables and untold amounts of setup, tuning, testing, wire tracing, and problem solving just to press 4 keys and hear something that sounds a bit like music. So above all, I think we need to make this worth it. And what are some worthwhile ways to do it and shortcuts we may wish to take? Chapter 1. Why do this? Why not do this? This video is sponsored by VOSTOK, aka a very nice chap called Jose, who makes this wonderful series of modules that are particularly suited to this job. The reason is that Jose's modules, and we've got an oscillator, filter, envelope or LFO generator, offset and attenuverter, and VCA modules here, is that each of these modules has multiples of that type of thing. So despite their relatively small size, they can so much more easily do multi-voice patches. And within this small little system that fits on a screen, we can have 4 analog VCOs, 4 Roland-style filters, oh yeah, 6 envelopes/LFOs, 6 offsets, attenuverters, which help us shape voltages, and 6 VCAs with a mono-mix output. There was even space left over to fit a bonus mixer, which we'll need, and also their new module, that would be a collaboration with our div kids, to make a thing called Trace, which has 4 inputs and 1 output, and you can crossfade all the ins with a CV control for that crossfade. Very cool. And there is something cool we'll do with this later. And because this is modular, we can allocate these resources in different ways. There's not just one solution to polyphony, depending on your definitions of polyphony, Mark Doty. My aim with this video is to give you some patch ideas to try. And you don't obviously necessarily need these specific modules because these are just common functions that will translate to other gear. We'll explore different ways we can achieve polyphony, and we'll get different effects by then swapping things around and twisting these patches. One limitation of this VOSTOK system, but which is arguably also a strength, is it will force us to do something that a modular polysynth is particularly suited for, and that's that each note is going to sound really quite different. Jose decided to make it so that in the center VCO module, each of the 4 oscillators has a completely distinct wave shape, instead of being the same or being switchable. So each voice is going to sound different. Obviously, on a real polysynth, you would tend to just pick one type of wave shape, and that's what you get. Whereas here, we have to use different wave shapes for each note. And if you're watching thinking, I'd like to be able to do that on my so-called modern fixed architecture poly, like a Polybrute or a Hydrasynth or something like that, well, on a complex, well-specified polysynth, you might actually be able to achieve a similar thing. One idea is if you have sample and hold, you could set the synth so that sample and hold is generating a different value for each key press, and then you could route that sample and hold value to mixer levels in your synth. And so by having different mixer levels bidirectionally applied, you can have it so that by pushing down the 4 notes, you would actually get different notes, but you'll need a pretty tricky polysynth to do it. And the other limit, or is it a joy, is that we're not going to be able to easily get exactly the same tonality, filter, resonance, or envelope settings for each of the 4 voices. The tone is going to be wildly different, and these individual settings will vary in different ways. And it will actually be more work for me to make them sound consistent than it will be for me to let them be different. So it's sort of the opposite experience of a trad polysynth, where it's more work to make things more distinct. On a modular, it's more work to make things sound unified. And human ears are really good at understanding differences in tone and volume from one thing to the next. And so I just think it's another reason to do it this way, for that kind of interesting, variable weirdness. If we're going to do it this way, we're going to have to embrace that. So let's make a weird, unique polysynth. Chapter 2. Let's make a basic modular polysynth. So to make a basic, true, 4-voice discrete polyphonic path, I have to connect the outputs of the 4 oscillators to the inputs of the 4 filters on Atlas. All the filters are set to low pass, and then the outputs of the filters go to the inputs of the VCAs on Ceres, or Ceres, or Keres. By the way, these braided cables are VOSTOK branded cables that they also sent along with these modules, and they feel really good. I really like soft braided cables. They're like super soft and curvaceous, so they can kind of go anywhere. Really nice. So outputs of the oscillators to the inputs of the filters, outputs of the filters to the inputs of the VCAs. That's it for audio. Now we need to connect the outputs of the envelopes in Fuji to 2 different things. One, I'm going to go to the frequency inputs of the filters, so they'll sweep the filters in a very pleasing way. This is just riveting TV. And I'm going to use that same signal twice. So I'm then going to route it to the CV inputs of the Ceres, or series, or Sirius, Keres. The Keres. That's not how it's pronounced. Just so simple. But now we're faced with a problem. How are we going to play the beast? Now, there is actually a commonplace solution that you may actually already own, and that is a device called the KeyStep Pro by Arturia, which has 4 discrete sets of CV and gate out on the back of it, including velocity. It's really nice. And there is a way, if you hold Shift and go to CV routing, that you can make, for example, track 2, send polyphonic MIDI. So when you hold down the keys, 1, 2, 3, 4 like that, then you will get 1, 2, 3, 4 CV and gate signals going out of the back. But there is a bit of a problem with it, as I discovered, which is that if you push the same key over and over again, it will simply send the same CV and gate out from voice 1. It only sends from 2, 3, 4 when you simultaneously hold down a 2nd, 3rd, and 4th key, which isn't really what I want. And so instead, I'm going to use a device called a CVOCD. This is made by 64 Pixels. It's a really clever MIDI to CV converter, and I've set it up to be just this, a polyphonic round-robin MIDI to CV enable box. And we have yet another bundle of massive cables, and let's set that up. So I go from the output A to the 1 volt per octave input of the first channel, output B. Can you guess what I'm going to do here? Channel 2, C, channel 3, D, channel 4. And then the gate outputs. Oh, dig deep, friend, to gate input 1. Guess what? Gate input 2, channel 3, to gate input 3, and channel 4 to gate input 4. Just so simple. And meanwhile, George Michael with a Juno 6D has in that time written an entire Christmas #1. The last output we need to make is from the mixed output at the bottom of series to the input of my output module. Oh, mate. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Okay. And so after a bit of futzing, what did I tell you about spending ages fine-tuning and fixing problems? I had to turn down the bottom VCA output of series. Oh yeah, baby. That ain't in tune, is it? So what I've done is I've turned all the frequency dials right to the bottom of the synth, and I've got a tuner from our friends at Corruger. And what we're going to do is check if it's got batteries, and we find it doesn't. 1 second, please, caller. And then what we do is we place some batteries into it for the first time in a very long time. And this tells you everything you need to know about how much I tune my oscillators. So then if I turn up my speakers, oh, mate, not good, is it? However, let's hold down the note formerly known as C. It's a B flat. And now the benefit of this round robin system is I can just push one key after another and tune them all to the same note. There we go. And just to be clear here, I've got my speakers on in the studio so that it can hear the note. Close enough for polyphonic synthesizers. God, that was fun. But once done, and because this has been on for some time, I think we're good. I think we don't need to do that again. And it means all the notes are harmoniously tuned. I have obviously edited this video, but in the studio, we are about 30 minutes deep at this point. I mean, I could have done this faster if I wasn't talking to you at the same time, but I hope my point comes across. Like many things worth doing, they are hard, and it isn't very fun, and it can be beset by problems made much worse if you have modules from different manufacturers. But I'm here to say it can be done. Chord mode on. Yeah, nice. And then we've got Atlas, of course, and we can turn these down. Oh yeah, mate. And then you get a nice sweep of the filters. Now I need to manage my levels because as you have 4 synths all getting smashed through one output, you need to turn everything down, otherwise it will clip. Really, it's so weird. It's weird. And as I'm messing around and trying to find sweet spots for the filters, obviously I am having to adjust all 4 filters at the same time. There is not one control which will offset all the filters, but there would be a way of doing that. And that is using a module that has a ability to create DC offsets, such as this IntelliGel mixer here. Then I could plug the output of this mixer channel D here, and with nothing plugged in, that will just create voltages if I turn it up like this. And I could mult that 4 times and feed it into the 4 FM2 inputs, second inputs to your filters. And so by using that one control, I would be able to control all 4 at once. And then these would act as offsets. Yet more wiring. But it is possible to do. So just to say, you can wire one-pot macros, and you could build this kind of super patch where everything was plumbed in and you had a kind of control center right at your fingertips for doing kind of offsets to filter and maybe tone controls for the oscillators or introducing modulation or what have you. That's just one example of a thing you could do, but what I'm actually going to do now is something that I've come to realize from messing with other polysynths, and that is I really like stereo polysynths. And it is really easy to think of a modular in many respects as a kind of mono device. But I don't just have like one output on this VCA, I have 6. In this case, if I had 4 speakers, a quadraphonic array, then I could literally assign one voice to each speaker if I wanted with these 4 outputs. But we can quite easily create a stereo mix here. Now, unfortunately, with this series and the asset, it does not have the ability to create kind of submixes. That is to say, if I plug into output 2 here, I will not get the mix of 1 and 2 together. Or if at the same time I also went into 4, then I wouldn't get 1 and 2 out of there and 3 and 4 out of here. It doesn't do that, unfortunately. So we are going to need an external mixer. So let's YMC. Yet more cables. And I'm going to mix the outputs into the IntelliGel mixer here. And then we don't need this mono output anymore. These are the connectors that are going to my Midas mixer. And then this does do the cascading thing. So what I will do is I'll just plug one into this socket, boof, and then the other into that. And now I've got a stereo output. One side will contain 2 oscillators, the other will contain the other 2. I have to turn up all the channels on here, and again, let's manage our levels because we know when we smoosh oscillators together, they will become quite loud. We'll turn chord mode off. Let's get a little arpeggio going on. Oh yeah. A little bit of reverb, please, Tony. Let's adjust the panning so they're not so extreme. cool. All right, getting into that. Now, an obvious thing that we should be doing is animating the VCOs, I think. So YMC moment again. And so this is simple enough. I want to go from the output of one of my spare Fuji channels, which are able to be envelopes, but with nothing plugged in, I can set them to loop. There's a little switch in here. Let's do that. And then this is a looping triangle wave. And actually, what I need to do is let's make use of this asset called asset, which will allow us to send copies of this. Because you remember me mentioning that the mixers do, and the asset do not unfortunately do the sort of submixing thing, but they do the opposite. When you plug something into this channel here, then it is copied to the other channel. So you can use one signal and diverge it in different ways. We talked about this in a recent video where I was using a Turing machine and sending it lots of different ways bidirectionally to different places, which had the effect of maximizing what that one voltage was doing. And we need to do that. So if I then go from the output of this top channel with YMC and go into the CV inputs for the shape controls on the Atlas, Senna even, the Senna Atlas is the filter. Wow. Any minute now, a blue tit is going to fly in here and start laying eggs on this. It's just so simple. And let's have a listen, shall we? So then, if I adjust the offsets and levels, wow, wicked. Oh yeah, that's nice. Then by remapping these, swapping these channels, I think I'd better balance the frequency spectrum of the oscillators. I've just adjusted all the Fuji channels so that we get the longest envelope attack and release that we can. Nice. That's nice. So up to this point, we've created a very utilitarian stereo mix. And what we've done is we've literally just smashed some of the voices, two of the voices in the left and two of the voices in the right. And we did swap them around to sort of balance their frequency spectrum. But wouldn't it be nice if it auto-panned? And if we think modularly, we have got the tools to create an auto-panner here, because what is a stereo panner except something that changes the volume on one side and then the other in opposition? And a thing that controls volume in a sort of automated way is a VCA. And a thing that can make something rise and fall is an LFO. And for example, if you wanted one side to always be positive while the other was kind of closed, well, then you could take one LFO and then invert it. And using an inverter, feed the inverted output into one side so that whenever it was positive, it would be negative on the other side and vice versa. So we have the tools to do this. So let's wire it up. The first thing to do is disconnect the cables that are going to my mixer and instead put them into VCAs because we want to control their volume. And I will then take my two sides and feed them into those VCAs. And then I will take my one extra LFO and feed it into my asset here. And here on the asset are little switches. And this little left switch chooses whether the channel is inverted. So I do want that. I want to invert this bottom one. This one on the right controls whether the offset is positive or negative as well. By turning these both up, and then if I feed these outputs into there, it should do it. YMC, mate. YMC. I'm so sorry. Now if I turn these little Mother Hubbards up, cool, isn't it? And so this is a little bit different to just panning each oscillator, each note in a different space. We're not quite doing that. We need more VCAs. It's fun to hear the difference here. If I turn off the inversion, we get a AM modulation thing going on. It's its own thing. Yeah, nice little call and response thing there, don't we? Feels like the right is answering the left. These are the kinds of weird things that the modular solution can offer. Fun modification might be to mix everything in mono. So by removing the second channel's cable here, what's happening is we're going to mix everything into mono. And because of this cascading thing, that one mono output goes to both VCAs now without me having to patch a mult. And now we get more of what we might recognize as the traditional auto pan, where what we're actually doing is we're panning a mono signal. And I think you get a bit more of that immersion, because you're hearing the same thing kind of moving around you. Let's wang chord mode on again. Oh yeah, I like that. Yeah. Oh yeah. It's fun, like when you have like really fine control over what is in what side, it almost creates like an accent. Ooh. voice, despite the YMCA. Nice. Now that's interesting, where you have some very short and some a bit longer. Oh yeah, really cool. Try doing that on a poly. A proper poly. I feel like the point here is to make something really like modulated and alive, where like each of the voices just has different things happening. Ideally, you've got different modulation of all of the tone controls. You might have the filters being opened and closed on a per step basis by sample and hold generators, by sequencers, by LFOs that you might have lying around. And then you vary things like gate length quite dramatically from one voice to the other, just so that each thing has just got its own personality. You know, I could go in and trim the VCA levels to create kind of accents and sort of grooves by having certain voices that were louder than others by design, or I could like automate that as well and just generally modulate the crap out of things. And as with all of these things, it will take time to find what sounds good. You know, it took me a while to experiment and be like, actually, let's change the gate length. And then by accident, I had one really short while the other was really long. That was not something that I just sort of thought of before this very moment. My point is, it's actually really interesting to try and make each voice very distinct. That is something that is uniquely possible by design when you do it this way. You might ask, are there any other devices that can do what the CVOCD does as well? And I feel I should also mention the Mutable Instruments Yarns, which I believe can. Haven't got a Yarns, would love to have one. I don't know if anyone makes like a clone of that now. Of course, I mentioned the KeyStep Pro also does a version of this, but to my knowledge, I don't think it does round robin. I hope I'm wrong about that, and please correct me if I am. What I've been using up to this point, again, is the 64 pixels CVOCD, which is doing an excellent job of this. And you can configure any number of ways, including you can also configure note priority so that it'll favor low or high notes, and you can do the round robin thing. And I've even got 8 spare gate outputs. I could be creating clocks and other things with those. And there's another really important studio tool that can also help you with this, and that's computers. I've got the AudioFuse X8 out here, which is Arturia's like new ADAT machine. And you would be able to connect this to an audio interface with ADAT. And this has 8 outputs, and these outputs are DC coupled. You can use Ableton Live with CV tools to generate the round robin CV. And because it's a computer, you could also do things like you could, instead of having just gates come out, you could have fully formed envelopes coming out of here. And you could use like LFO tools in the computer to modulate their length times and go completely bonkers. So yeah, computers, they have their uses. Chapter 3. What is paraphonic synth? A paraphonic synth is very much like something like the Moog Matriarch. The idea being that filters and VCAs and envelopes are expensive if you have it so that each oscillator is responding to the pitch of a different key, like we're doing now. But instead of having individual filters and VCAs, we smash all 4 oscillators into the same filter, into the same VCA, and every time we push a key, then it re-triggers that envelope. It sounds pretty good, but one of its big limitations, as you might come to sort of patch it up, is that every time you push a note, you're going to hear all 4 oscillators, whether you like it or not. And a way around this is to use additional envelopes and additional VCAs to gate the oscillators on and off, to make sure that when you're not holding a note down that corresponds to an oscillator, then that oscillator truly is silent. And if you smash all those through one filter, it still sounds pretty good. And it's an economical use of filters. So let's patch that up. And because of the surfeit of filters that we will find ourselves with, then there's one final interesting thing that I think we ought to try. Ooh-wee! I just cut there because that took a long time, probably half an hour of repatching and testing and problem solving to set up Paraphonic. And what this has afforded us is that we only need one filter. Oh, yes. And so what we are doing here is we're going out from the VCOs into 4 VCAs. Those 4 VCAs are being controlled by the CVO-CD, and we're doing that so that we can have one note being played at a time, but then add in more, which is something we couldn't do if we didn't have VCAs, because we need our oscillators to be quiet when the one we want to hear is being played. We need the other ones to be quiet. We need individual envelopes and individual VCAs, because if we didn't have that, every time you pushed a key, you'd hear all the other notes droning at the original pitch they were set to until they receive their next instruction to change pitch. So I think to do a meaningful paraphonic patch, you need your 4 oscillators here, 4 envelopes and 4 VCAs, which envelopes and VCAs hopefully are achievable, gettable. You may already have enough. But you only need 1 filter, and actually it doesn't make a huge amount of difference, does it? You also get the nice control over it. We have an individual envelope for the filter here that I've set at the bottom. And if we play solid chords, that is to say chord, 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 then the fact that it is re-triggering every note is no big deal. To get it so that my CVO-CD is triggering all the VCAs individually, but the filter at the same time, then I'm using the gate output from my key step here. And that gate output, which plays every time I play a note, that triggers the envelope that is controlling the filter. It's just a lot of futzing to save 3 filters, but that is a lot of savings. Having 4 filters is no guaranteed thing, but I think it's kind of fair that a lot of people have a bunch of envelopes, and you can never have too many VCAs, right? Maybe this is a reason why. Looks nice. It's nice having the cohesion of just 1 filter to squirk. Squirk. You can keep that, that's yours. You can chop that filter up, i.e. have a short envelope. Above all, the mark of polyphony here, the strength of it is the ability to have a single note be held and fade in the other ones. So getting rid of all of these cables and like thinking, what's a final weird, interesting polyphonic thing that we could try? There is a sort of dumb way that we can do the same thing. And I'm all about that, let me tell you. So what I've done here is I've taken the pitch output of my key step and fed it into a mult at the top here. And I'm just going to copy it so that every oscillator is getting the same frequency, the same pitch from the keyboard. And then what I'm going to do is use this trace module. So again, what trace is a crossfader. It's like a thing built with loads of VCAs behind the panel. And it has 4 inputs. And if I feed the oscillators, 1, 2, 3, 4, into those inputs, then what it will let me do is scan between them, effectively making 1 audible, 2 audible, 3 audible, and 4, and little blends in between. And if I wang that, and that's a technical term, straight into the output of the synth. You get the most wonderful sound as we blend between them. I wonder if you can tell where I'm going with this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put the output through a filter, because Lord knows it needs it. And then the output of the filter, I'm going to stick through the VCA. The VCA will go to the output. And then I have the gate output of my key step here, going to this bottom channel. And that bottom channel will gate the VCA. And what we've got here is an interesting thing where I've got a tone control in my trace. That's nice. And then if I go to the output of this bottom Fuji here and then make it cycle, will you cycle? You are cycling. Good person. Adjust this scan control so that things are... Now, it's not polyphonic, is it? Because it's only ever playing the same notes, more or less. But here's the thing. Nothing stops me changing the frequency that the oscillators are set to. It's effectively offsetting the oscillators so that they are going to be playing different notes. One of them, let's leave this top one, will be playing the root note. But 2, 3, and 4 will not. They will no longer correspond to this note. So let's take this out. Here's a blend of the two. You'll have to forgive some slight micro tuning. There is a fine tune control on here that I could switch on center, but I'm being a little hardcore. Did you see my strategy as well? I cross-faded between the two. So I could set up a relationship between 1 and 2, between 2 and 3, and between 3 and 4 that hopefully makes sense. And now if we put the CD control into it, what's going to happen? You know what's going to happen. Nice. Oh, I like that. Nuts, isn't it? And so, yeah, like you could use 4 VCAs and you could be using 4 LFOs and you could probably do something, especially if you had like a quad function generator where they one handed over to the next one. You know, when it had an end of cycle, then it would trigger the following envelope. Do you know envelopes that do that? So when one cycle is completed, it goes beep and says, hello, I've finished. And then you turn that trigger into the second envelope. And then you do the same thing to the third envelope and to the fourth envelope. So they trigger in succession. That would be a cool way of effectively achieving the same effect. But Trace does it all in one module. I think it's really cool. And that's polyphonic, if you ask me. Which is to say that there are many ways to skin this cat, aren't there? There's one more thing, which is something not to do with pitch, but tone, and something that is something to do with a polyphonic synth. Do you remember the Polymoog? You know, Gary Newman fans will be all over this like a cheap suit, and that is that the Polymoog had a thing called a resonator inside it. And a resonator is effectively 3 bandpass filters that have been tuned to frequencies that correspond to the human voice or a acoustic instrument, that are slightly resonant and that are mixed together and then sent to the output. And guess what, bub? We've got a bunch of spare filters, haven't we? And we've also got a mixer. I spy with my little eye Gary Newman smiling down on us. He's not dead, thankfully. But yes. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go from my one filter here into Atlas. And by the way, I might add, the Atlas has got an interpolating scanner bank, which is effectively like having a trace built in. You can scan between 1, 2, 3, 4. So if I just put the VCOs directly into Atlas, it would scan 2. But we don't get to create a resonator, which is what I want to do. So let's go from the out of channel 1 into channel 2. And we'll go from the out into the in of the mixer, the out into another in of the mixer, the out into yet another input of the mixer. And we'll take the mixed output of all 3 filters now and feed it into here. We'll set them all to bandpass. Can you hear it? Hot. I'll take away some of this. And what I'll do is I'll take off this. Interesting, isn't it? By the way, did you notice that the ins are cascading on Atlas? So what I put into channel 2 is being copied to 3 and 4. Da-da. And so by making these slightly resonant and then carefully dialing in their frequencies, I don't have a, turn these down. And by the way, turn that channel down so it's not adding a DC offset to it. Sounds so good with that. So you can make it sound like vowels by mixing 3 bandpass filters together. Something that the Polymoog did. Thank you to my awesome patrons on Patreon who support this channel, and thank you to VOSTOK for sponsoring this video and sending in these modules that have enabled us to play with these principles. Like all things in modular, it takes some effort and work, and it's a strange and odd way of doing things. But there are unique possibilities to be found, from the ability to individually modulate every aspect of a note, vary its panning in simple or in really complicated ways. If we had more modulation and more VCAs, then you can make it so that each voice is panning in its own way. But, you know, with just one simple modular, You know, just a monophonic set of everything. Well, with a DAW, you could multi-track it and create the same kind of rich complexity that we were getting out of this thing live with less stuff. There's always a way, and less is more when it comes to pushing your creativity. Thanks very much for watching, and we'll see you next time.